Hi and welcome to my Rolltop Rucksack tutorial. Hi, by the way, if you're new here, I'm Anna. I basically make bags out of like secondhand fabric, old jeans, old curtains, yeah, that kind of thing. I've been running a little business doing that for a while, and now I've started to show you how to make the bags too. So here's the Rolltop Rucksack. I think I realised that consciously I've been putting off doing it because I was concerned about the complicatedness of inserting this front zip pocket. It really took me like a lot of trial and error to kind of get everything, like the lining and everything, facing like the right way that I wanted it to. So there's a lot of flipping and flopping, and I just thought, gosh, that's going to be so hard to explain to anyone. So in my head, when I was thinking of sharing this, I was thinking I was going to change the zip or change the pocket or do something different. However, when I put pictures of these bags online, and also when I send them off to people, like the feedback I get back is that they love this kind of concealed pocket, you know, it's kind of quite flush, it's quite unnoticeable. I as well do really like it. I think it looks really kind of neat and tidy. You know what, this is like how I make them. It's only fair to show you how I make them. And sometimes I think something's really complicated, it might not be. So that's a little bit tricky, I would say. And then getting the binding neat around the strap, I always find that a little bit tricky too. But other than that, actually this bag is not too bad to make. Essentially, we're kind of just making like a fabric box. So without further ado, here is the tutorial. Hi, so today I'm going to be making a roll-top rucksack. I trust you know by now that I'm obviously all about using second-hand upcycled fabrics. So I've got this lovely vintage kind of bed spread for the front piece that I found at an antiques fair recently, and a pair of denim jeans, which I'm now thinking hopefully they're going to be long enough because they've been cut off at the bottom. But yes, some denim jeans and a few other bits and pieces. So let me show you what you're going to need. Well, I'll show you the pattern first actually, so you can see what we're going to need of each piece. When you print off your pattern, it is just going to be like so many different looking squares, but they all kind of go part 1, part 2, part 3, part 4, part 5, part 6. So for example, this is the front, and if you stick like part 2 to part 1, part 4 to part 3, part 6 to part 5 first, and then stick like that whole piece to that and that whole piece to that, that's kind of the best way to do it. You'll end up with one big piece like that for your front. Back top, so that's just part 1 and part 2, that's like your back top piece obviously, and then you've got your back bottom piece, which is 1, 2, 3, 4. The next big piece you'll have is the front pocket, so that'll be a kind of disguised pocket that goes in the front there. It's a little bit wider than your other one. Part 1, 2, 3, 4 for that. Then we've got this long bit, so this is the side, which will go alongside there. 1, 2, 3, and then the bottom, which will go along there, and that's just part 1 and 2. Then you've got a couple of pieces to put together for your strap, and then this piece of the back lining pocket. There's also another piece which I've so far forgotten to put on, so I'll add on, and it'll just be a long rectangle, which is kind of a zip cover piece that goes along there. You will have that as well. Okay, so that's all your pattern pieces. And then basically I would say for the side and the back, I usually go for the same fabric, and I usually go for something quite sturdy. So today I'm going to be using this denim. That'll be for the back bottom, the back top, and your side and bottom piece. Oh, and the straps. So as I say, I'm using this cool bedspread. That's going to be for the front, so that'll be for this big piece. Here's the fabric I've chosen for my lining. It's quite just a medium weight cotton fabric. You can use pretty much, you know, as long as it's thinner than your top fabric, which hopefully top fabric's a bit thicker. So you'll need the pocket from there, 2 of the big front piece, 2 of the long side piece, and 1 of the bottom piece, and also your front pocket, part 2 of those. That's for your lining. Got all my interfacing bits cut out. I would recommend using a medium to heavyweight interfacing. Mine unfortunately it's a thin one. It's a bit of a nightmare to work with, but I just made the mistake of buying too much of it, which will be fine because my fabrics are thick. I ideally like something a bit sturdier. So you'll need 4 of your straps, in the interfacing. One of your back top, one of your back bottom, one of your bottom, two of your sides, and one of your front pieces. And now wadding. Now wadding, because I'm using this fabric, I mean, it's not that thin. It's actually just like I kind of don't like how it feels on its own. And I feel like when it's quilted onto something, it gives it a little bit more, I don't know how to explain, but it kind of just makes the fabric seem a little bit nicer. So I am choosing to use one piece of felt that I just had upstairs, which I'm just gonna basically sew that onto there. If you're using something upholstery fabric, for example, something that's thick, a tapestry, you won't need to do that. If you're using something that's thin, I would recommend you do that. So cut out your front in, could be a thin wadding. This felt is actually quite good for that. I know this looks a bit weird, but I'm basically just trying to, as usual, use up anything that I already have. So I'm using another 2 pieces of felt. This is for the back bottom piece. I would recommend just using some kind of wadding like you would use to make a quilt, for example. That kind of works the best. I'm going to use, so that's 2 pieces of fleece. And then for the straps as well, a piece of wadding. If you cut your wadding a little bit shorter, you can see I've done a cut wadding to this line, basically just a centimetre from the edge, and that is just so that when you're sewing it, because you will sew it to the back piece, we're not sewing like loads of bits of wadding and denim and stuff together. It just makes it a bit of a thinner line to sew. I have actually, what I've done here, just to make it a bit thicker, is I've bonded 2 bits of this felt together. Again, I'd recommend using some kind of quilt wadding or something for that. Something that's like thin to sew with, but it's got a bit of bounce. This is the opposite. But it'll still do the job. Anyway, that's all your pattern pieces. And then for your hardware, you're going to need 6 D-rings, 1 inch, and then 1 inch straps as well to go with this. All in all, for this, it's like 1.8 meters. I guess you'd buy 2. And then you're going to cut this up into 2 50-centimeter pieces and 2 12-centimeter pieces. They're both for your straps. And then for the front kind of fastening, you've got 1 20-centimeter and 1 31-centimeter pieces. A small 15-centimeter zip for the inside pocket. And then for the front pocket, you will need a 30-centimeter long zip. I'm using this really wide one because it makes it a lot easier to sew in. So if you can, I mean, I did used to use these all the time. It was a real struggle, but I did do it. Yet I would say the wider you can get it, the easier that makes to put in. And then finally some bias binding, which is 1 inch wide when it's got its bits folded over. Or if you have, like me, I'm going to use this fabric, which you can see is already cut on the bias. It's a bit lavish, I know, because this is really nice fabric, but I used it for another bag. And so now that I've got this bit already cut on the bias, I'm just going to use the rest of it to make binding, and I think this will look quite cool with the bedsheet. So I'm going to bind off my straps with some of this, which I'm going to cut into 5-centimeter wide strips that need to be at least 90 centimeters long. They can go all the way around now. That is for the binding, and that I think is all we need. So once you've got all of that, let's start sewing. So now for me, because I still need to cut out these denim jeans, I'm gonna get my interfacings and cut open these jeans, take it all to the ironing board and cut these out. You might like to skip along this bit if you're not using a pair of jeans. I've cut my trousers up, I'm just going to give them a nice steam. To be honest, I might just lay everything out because I'm a bit worried about the length here as they've been cut. But I always start with my back bottom piece. Usually line the centre up with the seam in the trousers, and I just fold it over so it's like rough side facing outwards, and then so I'd pop that bit on there. You've got quite a few big pieces, so it's like might have to unpick a pocket. I guess a basic rule of thumb is kind of starting with all the biggest pieces, but also trying to think about other things and about fitting other things in. Although I did think I was going to get a strap down there. Clearly that's not going to happen. But I'm going to leave the straps till last because worst comes to worst, I can use some other denim for that, especially on the underside of the strap. So that's the back and the back top. Find this the quickest way. For me, it's not ideal. I'd rather not have a bit of the pocket showing, but it is upcycling and it is on the bottom piece of the bag, so it's not going to be... I'll also make sure to put this corner like towards the back. Okay, I have managed to squeeze all of them on, so I'm going to cut these out now and then we can do some sewing. So I've cut all my denim bits out. I've also cut out my front piece and interfaced that, and I've also cut out my two 5cm width bias pieces. I think they'll look pretty snazz box with the front fabric as well. Okay, so now what I'm going to do, I'll put these aside for a moment. I'm going to get all of my wadding pieces and pin my top fabric. So I'm going to need all my strap pieces, 4 of them, and the front and the back bottom. I can put the rest aside. Okay, so I'm going to pop my front piece down, just smooth that over, and then use a couple of pins here and there just to hold that in place. What I'm going to do now is sew some lines down here. Same thing with the back. Then I'm just sandwiching my wadding in between your strap like that. So I think I'm just going to use clip a bit easier and pin around the outside, because you're going to be sewing a line right through the centre. It's quite good to use these clips that you can keep in whilst you're sewing. I honestly had so many of these and what's happened to them. Just have to pin the rest. The thing is with pinning is that you've got to just be aware that you're not kind of fronting, you're keeping them all directly on top of each other when you pin. Okay, now take back your back piece. Basically what we want to do to kind of attach our top fabric to our wadding is do some kind of nice design perhaps on the back. So because I have this seam down the middle, I tend to draw a line where that seam would be. When I come to sew this line, I am going to sew it from this line and then I'll flip it over and do the V's from this side. Basically what I do, get a V pattern which looks quite nice. But I just kind of mark 12, 24, 12, 24, 12, 24, and then go from the top corner down to that first, and then go from that mark to that mark, and then that mark to the bottom. Same on the other side. Then I've got these 3 lines which I'm going to sew along. I'm going to quilt up this piece. I'm just going to do some squares for this, I think. This is just it's like a kind of chalk pencil, quite good actually. So I'm going to sew all these lines in now. Get some yellow thread. I always find when you're doing some kind of decorative like top stitching or quilting like this, it always looks better in a bit of a long stitch. Okay, now I'm going to take my back bottom piece and I'm just going to sew my line down the centre, and I'm going to do it from the denim side because obviously I want it to be exactly where this seam line is. But if you just had one flat piece of fabric, obviously you can sew it all from that side. But for this particular line, because I want to follow this, and then once I've done that I can flip it over. It just means that when I go to these points, it's not going to be kind of off that line. And then I'm just going to sew all along these lines that I've marked on. And I've also kind of sewn around the edge as well, just to hold it all together. So that's that. Now for the straps, it's literally just a line straight down the middle, but this bit can be a bit tricky, to be honest, because as you sew, your foot's going to want to push along whatever fabric's on the top. So start from the rounded end. Just make sure with each hand and each fingers you're really pressing down so that you're not going to let everything shift along. I'm kind of holding it and then pushing it forward a little bit with my 2 fingers just to kind of counteract. So yeah, just try and hold everything in place. Take all of these bits and pieces to the ironing board now that we've just quilted, and we'll give them all a nice press. Give these pieces all a nice little steam. And that's that. I just think that's given that a nice kind of bit of extra. Now it's time to bind off the straps. Either get your bias binding or your bias strips of fabric and your straps, and we'll take these to the machine. Okay, so it doesn't really matter which side I start on because both of my straps are denim, but for example, if I'd have chosen to use a top fabric and have a bit of a funky strap, and that was the side I wanted to be seen, I would sew it from the other side first, because when we come to do the top stitching on the other side, that's gonna be a bit neater, hopefully. Okay, so I'm literally just laying the strap down, laying my bias strip on top, so I'm lining up the edge. I'm just going to sew it on. Oh yeah, always holding it down and trying not to let anything move. I've actually just done this and then realised I wasn't recording. So when you get to the rounded bit, just do a few snip every centimetre or so, just to take you around that bend. And try not to pull it round, because the more you pull, the less fabric you'll kind of have to turn over to the other side, so it'll make that a bit trickier. So I'm just going to hold that with this hand, kind of flatten that down a little bit to make it easier, and then use this hand to move the whole thing round a bit. And when I get to the middle, I'll release my foot a bit, give it a bit of a jiggle. And continue like that, and then just straighten that up and keep laying it down again along the other side. Okay, I already did the other one when I thought I was recording, so that's both of those straps done. I can take these over into the ironing board now. Now if you need to trim anything down just to kind of make it all even amount of seam allowance all the way along, now's the time. Mine's kind of alright, but I would recommend just trimming down this kind of curved end. Not too much, but just makes it a little bit easier to pull the fabric around that bend. But if you do it too much, you're going to find it really hard to sew because your needle will keep falling off. Just like that. I'm going to trim this down so it's all even, because you can see I've got a bit of felt sticking out there. Okay, so now that I've got those all trimmed evenly, I'm just going to pull apart my bindings and kind of gently press those away, and then flip it over and just using your fingers as well, kind of push and meld that into a good shape. And then it's just a case of, good to use these clips, and you're just going to basically fold it so that it meets the same seam line and clip it in place for now, every so often. And you can keep giving it a bit of a press, making sure that it's quite tight, because it will look better. It will look better. It will be a lot easier to sew, and you will have less chance of getting, you know, those ripples you can get sometimes. So I'll do it up to the curve, and then I'll do it down this side as well, going up to the curve, and then we'll sort that out. Obviously, if you're using kind of pre-ironed bias binding, you can just flip it over and clip it. Okay, so now I've came to this curve. I'm just going to push it up with my fingers, and you just want to kind of like press it a bit so that the fabric kind of molds into that curve as best you can, and get the iron to it. Like so. Little clip in there. Okay, so now I'm going to do the same with my other strap, and then we can top stitch them. So I've got my straps all pinned into place now. I'm going to top stitch the binding down, and I'm going to use a zipper foot on my machine. And basically, because your fabric can have a tendency to kind of ripple up and be pushed down. I just want to be holding, even in between the pins and the clips and stuff, holding everything down as much as I can with, like, you know, force. The more looser it is, the more likely it's gonna ripple. So I'm pulling it, just before I sew it, I'm flattening it down so it's tight along the edge with that side. And then using these two nails, if you've got nails, it's quite handy. I don't really at this point, but using what I have to hold that in place so it's like tight and it's gonna stay there, and then I'm sewing. It's a bit like slow, but it kind of works. Round this end, it's always a little bit trickier. Just try and release the foot every now and then. Use my fingers to flatten it down. And kind of turn it around a bit. But you'll be glad to hear that that bit's actually going to be covered up by the hardware. So you try your best. So yeah, just flattening it down. And if I feel like anything's kind of being pushed where it shouldn't be, I just release my foot and kind of get it all back into where it should be. Pull that flat in there. There we go. So now give these a nice press. If you've got any kind of ripply bits, which is easily done, and just give them a good old steam. Hopefully this should be all right. Give them a good taut pull. And then a good firm steam. Nice. Okay, so what I've got now is I've got this nice back piece, front piece is kind of ready, and these straps, I can start getting a few of these bits ready and together. If we take the two shortest bits of the cotton strap and 1, 2, 3, 4 of the D-rings, take one bit of strap, 2 of the D-rings, and you want to just thread it through so that you've kind of got one length, so a little bit longer than the other, which you'll just fold over. And we're basically going to sew that to the end of our strap that we've just made. So yeah, if yours is a little bit messy around there, not to worry. So with my 14cm piece of strap, I'm just going to take this to the iron and fold it into a little kind of shape like that for the hanging loop. And just steam that into shape. So that's like that. Okay, first of all, I'm going to change back up to like a normal sewing foot rather than the zipper foot. And then I'm going to change my bobbin to the same colour that's going to match the underside of my strap. And then I'm going to change my top thread to one that's going to match my cotton strap. And what you might like to do, because as you can see this cotton strap frays quite a lot, is just snip the corners and kind of neaten off that edge before we fold it and sew. And it just means that you're less likely to kind of have any bits kind of sticking out when you sew it on. So I'm just going to sew this on with a box and a crisscross. So that's like that. This bit's just kind of hanging off the end there, and your thread should match the underside of there. And then so do that to the other side as well. So they're both like that. And then what I'm going to do now is take my 2 long pieces of strap, and I'm going to change my bobbin up now to match my top thread, so that they're both the same colour as my cotton strap. And then on one end of each piece, I'm going to just fold it over once and fold it over again and stitch that down. Back stitching, and I'm just going to like hold that in the machine while I fold the next one up, so I can kind of go straight onto this one. And also do this on your 31cm length as well. So what you're going to do with this 20cm piece is take your 2 remaining D-rings and just thread them onto the end like that, and then just fold your end over once and then back onto itself like that, and then we're just going to sew that together with a little kind of box. So that piece is like that. Okay, so I've got everything I need now to just put the whole back piece together. If we start with this little fella, the hanging strap, just pop him right in the middle there. And I normally do it with the kind of two long flat bits against the back, but I guess it doesn't really matter. And then on either side of that, I'm going to place my straps and then take the two long pieces and then pop these at the corner. So you're going to have like a centimetre seam allowance there. So just a bit above that, and I like to do them so they kind of go corner to corner. And the wrong side, I guess if you will, the bit that's folded over, is facing upwards. So now we take this little piece with the two D-rings, and this is going to go on top of your hanging loop, and it's going to face so that you've got the folded side again facing upwards and the flat side against the back of your bag, because that's then going to fold over like that. So that's all like that. And then this piece can get sewn onto the front of your bag. So we're going to want to sew this piece on so it's like about 37 centimetres up from the top of the bag. And where that'll be is it'll basically be where your seam, where all your straps and your gubbins are coming from, because you're going to fold that over and kind of connect it there. So once again, we're just going to fold over the edge of that, place it right in the middle of your front piece, and as I say, 37 centimetres up. You can just get your back piece if you want and kind of line it up with that. I'm just going to pin that on, and I'm going to sew that, making sure that I'm encasing the raw edge into that. I'm just going to sew a box and a cross to hold that in place, and I've got the folded edge facing upwards. So that's like that, and then put that to the side and get the back piece. I can change everything back to my grey, which I was using for the rest of the bag as well now. Alright, so firstly I'm just going to sew kind of around the edge of the bag to hold everything in place. Do this on a kind of long stitch. So that's like that, and now I'll take my top piece. I'm going to lay my top piece over, lining up the seam allowances and just clipping that in place. And then I'm going to sew it from the other side, because this side's a bit stiffer and it's less likely to shunt along. And I can also see the lines of which I've just sewn all my gubbins on, so I can make sure I'm like on this side of the line, and that's all going to be in the seam allowance. And sometimes the strap might fall, like this has just fallen on the side of the table and it's pulling the whole thing down. So I'm just making sure nothing's pulling anything along the way. Sometimes when I go like where I know where the strap is as well, I like to do a back stitch there just to make sure it's really slammed down. It's probably not necessary because we are then going to top stitch over, so I don't know. Okay, and then we can pull this back and do a line of top stitching, making sure you're always pulling it quite flat and taut, like 1 millimetre away from the seam line. A real back stitch there. And then if you line up your machine foot with that line that you've just sewn and sew another line, it's just for decoration really, and stability I guess. You might not be able to see that well, but there's 2 lines of top stitching running just along there. I'm going to whack this under the iron just to iron out that seam, and then that is the back piece that we can then pop to the side. I love it when the back's done because it really starts to feel like a bag is in the making. So anyway, we can pop this piece to the side now and start with the horrible task of putting in the zip. Oh righty ho. So firstly I'm going to sew both of my lining, like front lining pocket pieces. Can I get both of those and attach them to my zip first of all. My zip is, as you can see, quite long. I like to use what I've got, and I got like 100 of these or something kind of dead stock from this warehouse, and they're really nice and sturdy kind of zips, but also they're nice and wide, so I'm going to use this. Okay, once again changing up to the old zipper foot. It's a bit back and forwards. Doesn't really matter which colour thread you're using as well at this point. So basically what we want to do, if we take one piece of the lining, lay it so that it is right side facing up, and the same with a zipper, right side facing up. Sorry, that's the iron. And I'm just going to lay it on. I'm going to give it a little bit of seam allowance just to make it easier to sew. So there's like a little bit of the fabric poking out on this side. We're just doing this as a form of kind of pre-attaching it to the zip. So I'm literally just going to sew really close to the edge of the zip and attach this to the lining like that. So that's then just sewn onto the edge like that, and then kind of pull it away from the zip and take your other lining piece. Basically just doing the same again, so we're line up both the lining pieces and just sew that down to the edge of your lining again. So with your zip, you've got the back, the wrong side of your zipper facing the right side of your fabric. So basically what we end up there is two pieces of lining with right sides facing up and the wrong side of your zipper in between them. And that is that. Put this to the side for now. And now take, so your two long side pieces and your bottom piece, take these to the machine. And we're just going to sew them all together lengthways. So you're going to end up with a side piece, bottom piece in the middle, and then another side piece attached to the other end of that. And the main thing to remember to do here is that when we sew these together, I'm going to leave, so I'm not going to start sewing until 1 centimetre in from the edge. So I'm going to sew from here to there, leaving a centimetre open at each end with a centimetre seam allowance. Back stitch at each end. So you can see, sewn those together there, and I've left the ends both open by a centimetre. And I'm going to do the same on this side. But this looks, it's just funny, isn't it? Now I'm just going to press these seams and just press these open and flat like that. So if we line up our side piece with the side of our front piece that we're going to put our pocket into, we are going to sew this seam allowance on the side piece that's folded over. We are going to sew that down folded over. So just remember to leave a centimetre of seam allowance there. Don't line up that edge, for example, with the bottom edge. I'm going to pin this in place. And basically what I'm going to do here is from the top up, I'm going to sew with a smallish stitch, about 2 centimetres, and then the same up to there. And I'm going to leave a bit here where I sew with a very long stitch that's going to come out, and that's going to be the opening for the zip. I'm going to mark 2 centimetres there, so that's 2 centimetres. I'm going to mark it with a double pin so that I know that this is where I change from a small stitch to a long one, the length of my pocket. So now I'm going to take this over to the machine. I'm going to stitch a small stitch from the bottom, and what I'm going to do, I'll show you anyway, but I'm going to fold that over and I'm going to sew seam allowance down flat right from that corner. I'm going to sew small up to the first double pins, and then I'm going to sew a big long stitch up to the second set of double pins, and then from then up to the top I'm going to sew a small stitch again. Once we've put this zip in, the rest of the bag is like so easy. Okay, so when I put this under the machine, I'm going to fold away this bit, which is the bottom bit, the loose bit, because I'm going to start sewing exactly from this point there. It's a normal to small stitch, and I'm going to back stitch as well. We're folding this over so that we get a really nice crisp corner for our bag. So up to those pins and back stitch, and I can take those out. I'm going to cut the threads there as well, so I'm starting a whole new kind of line of stitching. Put it on the longest stitch you've got now, and then sometimes I like to just push the fabric towards the needle so that it doesn't all come this way. Okay, no back stitching with the long stitch. We're going to take this one out. And then back down to a short stitch again. Do a back stitch and then up to the top. Okay, now take this piece, we're going to press these seams open flat at the ironing board. Okay, so press that seam out flat like that. A couple of like random looking things I'm going to do now. First of all, I'm going to look at my seam and see the point where it changes from a long stitch to a short stitch. And I'm just going to use a pin and kind of weave it through doubly like that to mark where those points are, because later I'm going to use them when I'm sewing my zip in. And the next kind of slightly random looking thing, so I've got this long strip of denim which I'm going to use as a kind of zip cover. I did this as I was originally making these bags with tapestry. I didn't want, you know, the zip to always be catching on it, but also I just think it looks quite nice. Line up the long piece that you've got that matches your side piece and line it up with the edge of your front top fabric piece. And we're going to sew this together as close as we can get to that long stitch line that we've just sewn. It's a little bit tricky, but take it to the sewing machine. Hi, so this is me from the future. I'm just actually editing this tutorial, and I've realised that whilst I'm trying to explain this next little bit, it's not really in shot, which is not very helpful. So I'm back to hopefully do a better job of that. So this is just where I'm putting this bit into the seam before I put the zip in. It's quite good that I'm doing it again actually, because I've done all the different bits of stitching in different colours, so hopefully that's going to explain better what's going on. So for the purposes of this, this is kind of like my little fake bit of bag. So I've got the side in denim and this is like the front with our seam here. So you can see that the red bit here, this is where you've got the small stitch coming in from each end. And then this blue stitching in the middle, this is like the longest stitch on my machine. So you can't really see, but that's just a really long stitch that will come out really easily. And then so once I've done that, press the seam open flat like that. And then if we get our long strip, which is the zip cover bit, and we're just going to line up the edge of this, the long edge of this, with the edge of your front fabric, so this one for me, and then take this back to the machine. Okay, so I change up to a zipper foot for this bit, and I'm going to change this thread up to this kind of corally pink so you can see which is which. And this stitch, so we're going to try and go about 1 millimeter away from the long blue stitching, and we're going to start just above it, so maybe a couple of centimeters up here, and this is going to be in just a regular stitch, same as the red one. So hopefully you can see that it's this light corally pink stitching that I've just done, so it's about 1 millimeter away from the long blue one that's going to come out. So when you open up this seam on the other side, you should just have a little slither of your top fabric coming through. And then so you can just press that open and it should look like that. So that should be the back of what your seam looks like. I think we're good to go back to the original tutorial now, so bye. So I'm just going to put some temporary pins in just to make sure that's held out of the way as well. I'm going to get my zip. Right, so what we're essentially aiming for is the zip. We want it to be on the front, the actual zip bit, so lined up against here. We can line the bottom up with the bottom of our front piece. Just snip that excess away. So the bottom of the lining. Line up the edge of the zip with the edge of that denim piece. And just lay it along for now till we get to the top. Right, and what I'm going to do is pin just the zip, not the linings, in place there. So basically I've just pinned the top of the zip. It's in place so that the actual zipper is on the side of the front. And I did used to try and pin these on and then sew it, but I just found like it wasn't really working for me, and I found it easier to put it under the machine with just the top bit pinned and use my fingers and feel where the zip was for the rest of it. So that's kind of what I'm going to show you now. So let's take this to the machine. I'm going to change my top fabric up to the same colour that I've used to quilt the front with, which is this yellow. If I said top fabric there, I meant top thread. This is where it all gets a little bit kind of hairy. Now you can see I've got both of my lining pieces facing away from the machine, so they're coming out of the side piece there. What I'm going to do is use my fingers to feel for where the zip is and make sure it's lined up just under where my finger is here. That's where I want it. I'm going to pop that, I'm going to put my machine down there. Okay, and I'm going to start sewing from, remember I put that pin in before to mark where the long stitching starts. So I'm going to start sewing from there, and I'm going to back stitch a little bit. I just want to make sure with my fingers that I've always got the zip. I want it to go in like down there. So I'm going to take it nice and slowly, back stitch a little bit. And then I'm just going to keep putting the zip in place, holding it and sewing. Making sure it's in the right place underneath here. So you can start to see it a bit more now, so I can literally just like I'm lining up that nice denim edge with the edge of the zip. I'm laying it on top like that, holding it. Sewing, and I'm just going to sew and backstitch up to that point where I've got that second pin to mark the end of the long stitching. So I'm going to backstitch. I'm going to cut these threads because I'm going to have to flip my lining now. Now what you want to make sure here is, because you'll have two rows of stitching if you look on the underside. One is the way you've attached your zip to the lining, and the other is where you've just sewn your zip on. When I used to use like thinner zip, these two would be quite close together, and you would just need to make sure that the line you've sewn your zip on with is inside the line that you've sewn your lining to your zipper with, because otherwise basically your whole zipper might not have got caught there, if that makes sense. So I'm going to flip this over now, and I'm going to get both of the lining pieces. First of all this one, take that over so that it's now on the front side, and just smooth it away from the zip. I can actually unpin my zip now because I've sewn it in place. I'm going to bring my zipper down so that it's below the line that I've marked with this pin, to mark kind of where my zipper is going to start and everything, where that long stitching starts. So bring that down to, it's going to be within that, and then take this lining piece as well and lay it on top. Now you don't want to pull it, you want to make sure your zip is laying flat, and then just gently kind of peel this, it's facing that way. I feel like I'm doing an absolutely just terrible job of explaining this. I think this is why I've been putting off releasing this pattern for so long, just because I have no idea how I'm gonna even attempt to explain this to anyone. But now what I'm gonna do is flip this over like that, so I've really not moved anything about, hopefully. And I'm just gonna sew the top and the bottom. It's because I'm doing it in separate colour threads as well. Otherwise I could actually, if it was the same colour, if my front was the same colour as the side, I could do that and go up to the top and that. But I'm not. So here I'm just going to do back and forwards. To seal off the bottom of the pocket. Snip my threads away. I can feel that my zip is here as well. That's where I've got my pin, which was marking the kind of beginning of the long stitches. And that is where I'm going to do a bit of back and forwards. Nice and gently. That is like that now. I can kind of take all of these spare pins. Now, we still want both of the lining pieces to be going away from the side piece now. So they're both going to be underneath the front piece. And I'm changing my thread back up to grey for this final little bit. Again, I'd say this is a little bit tricky because we're going to be trying to sew right up as close as we can to the edge without catching like any of our top front fabric. Back stitching. And I will be holding this down close to the zip with my fingers and sewing along there. Okay, now to make it a little bit easier, because my zip is really quite big, my zipper, I don't always have to do this, but it doesn't hurt. I'm going to unpick a little bit of that long stitching. Just where it kind of goes over the large zipper there. And it just means that I can flatten this edge down, making it a bit easier to sew. And I'm just going to sew up to that point and back stitch. So what you should have, you can't really see because I've got kind of light coloured thread. With the lining, both sides going towards the front piece, you should have a line of stitching going along the bottom there, down the side and along the top. And then if you peel this bit away, it's like that. I'm going to unpick the rest of that long stitch line. And what I do is I just get a pin that's got a little bit of a head on the end. Probably never going to focus on that, but you know what I mean. And just use that little head of the pin to kind of catch the thread and pull it out. Okay. Because I just kind of want to show you what we end up with now. Oh, go away. And it's in a hope that it's kind of starting to make sense. So there's our piece of denim that we sewed on as a kind of zip protector. So you can see how that works. And if we undo our zip, what we should have is nice clean lines everywhere with our lining going the right way. So you can see our zip's just coming out of the lining and that bit there. And the same on this side, it's a nice clean line. So we've got a nice lined pocket. So now, if we've achieved that, hopefully, the last little thing we can do in terms of this pocket is I'm just going to cut away my excess zip and then just, it's easier without a zipper foot, but if you sew the top and bottom together, starting from the bit where the zip is, going out to the ends on both sides. And then what I like to do is flip it over, just lay the front piece on top and make sure you've kind of got a bit of, like you're not pulling the pocket really tight or anything. Because there's going to be stuff going in here. You might want to give it a little bit of extra. And then I'm just going to seal that end off, I'm just going to sew it to the top piece. And then we can trim any excess. Okay, so here we have that. I hope that was all right. we've got our pocket in the side. If you've achieved that, then just have a cup of tea now. Do you know what I mean? Like, have a little bit of a break. Tell you, first few times, especially with the little zippers, I was just unpicking non-stop. Anyway, hopefully you've got to this point. I'm gonna have a little break now. It is plain sailing from now on. We're literally just gonna sew. Basically, we're just sewing that into like a box, putting the back on top, put that to the side, sew the lining into a box. It is easy peasy. So yeah, I'm gonna have lunch. I'm gonna have a bit of jacket potato, cheese and beans, and then we'll continue. Okay, that's lunch done. I also had a cream egg. I'm going to change my needle back up to a normal one as opposed to the zipper one. I feel a bit more relaxed now that I've kind of put that zipper in. I know it's going to be such a painful experience when I come to editing the video because I'm sure that just made no sense. But here we are. Now, the next step is I'm going to sew the bottom piece to the bottom of the front. Righty hosiery. So I'm gonna be sewing down my seam allowance. This allows us to get this kind of really nice corner that we're going for, because it is essentially kind of a box that we're making, so it's kind of all about the corners. Okay, line that along with the bottom, because I tend to sew each piece on separately. So I'll do the bottom and then I'll do the side, and it's because I always want to be starting right at the point of like this, where this kind of splits open, if you will. So I kind of will fold that bit away, clip or pin this bit down because we really don't want it to shunt into the corner. And I'm going to start sewing from this point here. So I'm going to back stitch so it's really strong. So I'm basically coming onto it here. Like so. And then I'm just sewing right up to here, and I'm going to back stitch here. So that you can see that the side went down to there, and then this goes down to there. It will mean we'll get a nice corner there. Okay, so I've done that. Now this bit's a bit like, might look a little bit weird, but it's just because in the essence of trying to make these corners nice, I'm gonna sew a little bit of the corner first, just like 2 centimeters, and then I'm gonna flip it round and sew it like from the other side down to the top. Because if I was to start sewing it at the top, and say this all just shunted down even slightly, I would then end up with like excess that I would have to try and cram into that corner. It would end up looking a bit messy. So any discrepancies, I want to be going up there. Now, ideally you don't have any discrepancies, but I know I do. Okay, so I'm just going to go like start from a couple of centimeters or so up and just come down into this corner and back stitch nice and strong. Come off there. That just ensures that I've got a really nice corner going on there. And then I'm going to flip it so I can see where I've just sewn. I'm going to join back onto this line, and then I'm going to continue sewing this side onto the front down here. It's matched up, but sometimes you can get a bit of excess for whatever reason. You've stretched one side a little bit more than the other. We obviously endeavour not to do these things, but it does happen. So if there was anything extra, I'd just, you know, obviously if it's at the top, we can just trim that down after. But that should mean we've got some really nice corners going on there. So if I just get the back piece and I'd kind of lay that, I'm going to start from the bottom where I can kind of go along this edge and then come back up that edge, and then I'll do that edge after, if that makes sense. Just because I never want to start from the top. So I'm starting from the bottom, and once again I've folded over the seam allowance. Got that bit folded away, so I'm going to be starting right from that corner, back stitching. and right to that corner again. Go back stitch, little corner, turn this and kind of to go up the side now, make sure that's in there. Back stitching so those two bits will perfectly meet up where they kind of separate, if that makes sense. And back up to the top. Okay, I'm gonna do what I kind of did on the other side, the front, where I start the corner off on this side and then flip it and go back up to the top. So again, I've got that bit folded over. I'm just gonna sew from about here down there, do a good old back stitch right into that corner. So that's just sewn down a little bit there. And then I'm going to flip it over and from this line just continue on up to the top. So what I've got now is this kind of boxy shape, and I'm going to just trim away some excess from the corners. So if I get it, to be honest, because of that way that we've folded those bits over, you only need to trim away, for example, this orange top fabric. So just hold them back and snip away. So that's like that. This bit doesn't really need it because of the way that ends up all folded in anyway, because of the zip. Cut that bit of strap away. Again, chop that corner off. Same on that side. So that's that. Now, I've also noticed that I've got a few odd discrepancies where things aren't quite matching up at the top. So I'm just going to kind of fold my box. So I'm folding the edges down, trying to get it so that they all match and smoothing everything out. Obviously, you've got your straps in there, but try and do the best you can if this has happened to you. And I'm literally just going to straighten that off. Right there, you see, no harm done really. You might need to re-back stitch. I'm just going to re-stitch that because I've snipped off my back stitching. So we are going to iron out these seams as well, but I'm thinking let's get the lining made up because then we can just iron all of them at the same time. So get one of your like big front lining pieces and the little kind of long square, not to be confused with the bottom piece. So lay out your big front piece and then right sides together, right in the middle. If you line your pocket piece up with the bottom and then just lay the pattern piece that you've got, if you've cut out your little zipper hole, just draw on your rectangle there and use a few pins to hold that in place. And then we're just gonna sew around the perimeter of that rectangle under the machine. Quite a small stitch because we've got some tight corners. Just sew around the edge. Take the pins out now. And then now basically what we want to do is we want to cut straight through the middle lengthways. But just before we get to the end, we want to go up into each corner. So we're going to be cutting kind of 2 V's and then through the middle of that. So if I just get my scissors, I'll just fold it in half, make that initial cut. And then up as really close as you can get to the corners without cutting the thread. So then we've got this going on. And then take this pocket bit and pass that through that hole like that. I like to get the corners, both ends, and just give them a nice firm wiggle so we can get some nice corners. And then we're going to press this on the iron. Press it on the back side for a couple of reasons. Is one, you can kind of roll the fabric back so that essentially your seam will be hidden from the front. It's always good to try and iron anything on the side that's not going to be seen, just in case anything comes off your iron or something like that. So you can see there that my seam's just slightly, it's visible on the back and not really on the front. It's a little thing, but you know. Back to the zipper foot and just place your zip underneath and then place your letterbox kind of hole directly on top of the zip. So it's like this, it's just coming through, and we are just going to sew all the way around. Oh yeah, so I would say as well, if you've got a zip like mine and it's got a kind of ugly plastic gluey bit like mine has, I just pull the zip down a bit and I'll make sure that is up against top there, so you're not going to see that gluey bit. And then yeah, just sewing all the way around. So that's like that now, and then like this on the back. So I'm just going to pull up the rest of my pocket to lay it like over like that. So I folded it over, and then I'm going to start from one end and sew it up along there, along the top, back down the side. And that's creating my pocket really. That's all sewn up now. There's my little pocket. Right, so I've just pressed that pocket, just make it nice and neat. And now I'm going to sew all of my side pieces, my bottom pieces together. So side, bottom, side, and the same thing that I did before where I've left the centimetre open on each end. Back to my normal foot for hopefully the last. So 1 centimetre seam allowance, and also starting a centimetre in and stopping a centimetre in to give us a little open bit. Iron these seams open. Okay, so I'm going to take my big front lining piece and these side pieces that I've done and attach the sides. As it's the lining, I'm going to start from the top and just go all the way around, because if there was a little bit of bunching right in the corner down here, as I say, that's at the bottom of the bag. It's just not really a big deal. Start from the top, 1 centimetre seam allowance. I'm gonna sew to that corner. Corner of that as I twizzle it. Sew that bit down as well. To that corner. Then I'm going to take my back piece and attach that in the same way, apart from this time. So I'll go all the way down the side. I'll sew like a little bit of the corner, but I'm mainly going to be leaving the bottom open. I'm going to sew the corners, so like 4 centimetres maybe on each side, and then leave a big gap, because we're going to pull the whole rucksack through this gap at the bottom. Carry on to that corner and then back up the side. Always sewing with the side piece facing up, because I want to fold those bits of seam allowance over. Reach the bottom corner. I'm just flipping it around to do for the bottom seam, but I'm literally just gonna, from the corner, I'm gonna do a few centimetres, then I'm gonna take my needle out, leave that all open, and then start a few centimetres again just in front of the next corner. Okay, we've got another box. Okay, so just to iron out these seams, pop this little box bag thing over the end of your ironing board, and with the lining I just do the seams to one side. I don't really bother doing them open like that. So that's them. And now for top. Now we've already done the side with the zip in, so in terms of this we're going to do the other front. Try and go right down to that corner if you can. You've obviously got you've got a few places where you've got a bit of bulk, like the seams and the joinings, but just kind of try and get it out flat as best you can. Give it a good bit of steam. I'm going to attempt as well to just give the front to bottom seam a little bit of an opening and an iron as well. It's a bit trickier. Looks a bit weird, but I tell you, these like last little bits of steaming seams and stuff like that, they just really do make the world of difference. I'll let you off doing like the back to bottom because it's, you know, turn your bag right way around and keep your lining inside out, and then making sure that you have got the lining bit with the pocket, so that's the back, facing the back when we slot our bag into this. So we're slotting this into this like a sack, because we're gonna just sew the whole, these two together now around the edge, and just match up all my seams. So the two side seams on this side, I'll just clip them together. Everything should match up nicely. So I've just got that clipped right sides together with the bag and the lining, and then I'm just going to sew all the way around the top. It's best to always keep the kind of flimsier fabric on the underside when you're sewing, because that's the one that's more likely to move along. So I've got the lining on the other side and sewing it with the denim on top. Okay, once you've done that, you can actually pull everything through your hole in the bottom of the lining. And then here is a bit that's actually going to be a lot easier for those of you using a domestic machine, because I'm going to do 2 layers of top stitching on the lining all the way around. So it's a bit complicated because you need to do it all through this hole. Get the hole and let's start from like this back seam here. Obviously if you've got a domestic, you can just put this all through the arm of the machine and it's a bit easier, but here I need to just get this bit under the machine and then make sure that I've always got the hole. I'm always kind of sewing through the hole, if that makes sense. Gosh, I'm not looking forward to writing the instructions for this bag. Bad enough trying to say it out loud. When I start, it'll probably make sense. So I'm going to start sewing. So I'm sewing kind of 1 millimeter away from the seam and on the lining side, just making sure that all around the bit I'm sewing, the holes kind of open around. It's kind of like, it's not hard to do. I feel like it's just hard to explain. Okay, so I've done one line all the way around. I'm just going to move my needle along a bit now, line the foot up with that line and do another line of stitching. You can stop there and just have the one. It's literally just to kind of make a good bendy edge there, but I feel like because we've got a double row of stitching on the back, do you know what I mean, we might as well mirror that over here. You do just want to be careful that you're never catching any bits of lining that you shouldn't be. So that's your little couple of rows of top stitching around there. And then what we can do, and I've pinned our hole back up, just sew a line down there just to do that up. So I've just sewn that up like that. So close to the end now. The last little kind of fiddly bit is we're going to try and turn the bag inside out, the whole thing inside out. Because what we need to do now is attach the bottom of the lining to the bottom of the bag so it doesn't like come out every time you get something out of your bag. So these bits here are actually pinned on to the seam allowance of the actual rucksack. So if you wanted to do these by hand, which is quite easy, literally just a few whips there, knot it off. Or if you want to do it under the machine, it's just a case of kind of making sure you're keeping on the seam allowance. And literally just something like that'll do. It's just to hold it to the bottom there. Okay, back to turning the whole thing the right way around for the last time. I'm just going to iron the top edge so that I've got the lining underneath. I'm also going to push out all of those corners and give it a good steam. The last little thing to do is to take your long bit of strap that comes out of the corner there and thread it firstly through both of the D-rings kind of coming from the back, and then through just the under one, bottom one. So that's like that. Do that on the other side. And like that. And then we can kind of roll the top down and do the same there. There we go. I hope that wasn't too much of a shambles. Once again, I just feel like the blooming awful tutorials, but you know, the feedback I've had has been kind. And hopefully, you know, they'll improve. You've got your straps, adjustable, the opening. I mean, you can kind of experiment if you feel like it on different openings. You could do a clasp. I used to do like a bit with a loop on the end and then put a big button or a toggle there, but it wasn't very adjustable. That was the thing. So if your bag was quite full, you know, sometimes, or you got something long in it, you wouldn't have been able to really stretch it over. So that's why I've moved to this. But there's many other ways you could kind of do it as well. So yeah, oh gosh, if you've made a bag, if you have made a Rolltop rucksack, like, please, I would love to see it. Thanks so much for watching. If you've got any questions, just leave a comment either here, Instagram, Etsy, whatever, and I will endeavour to answer it ASAP. And yeah, thanks for watching.